July 30th, 1945, 12:14 a.m. The USS Indianapolis, a Portland-class heavy cruiser, was struck by two torpedoes fired by Japanese submarine I-58 in the Philippine Sea. The first torpedo struck the bow, destroying fuel tanks and starting fires. The second hit amidships, detonating the forward powder magazine. The explosion tore a 40-foot hole in the hull. Seawater flooded the ship. Within 12 minutes, the Indianapolis rolled to starboard and sank bow first into 12,000 feet of water. Approximately 1,196 men were aboard when the torpedoes hit. An estimated 300 went down with the ship, killed by the explosions, trapped below decks, or unable to escape the sinking vessel. Around 900 men made it into the water. They wore life jackets or clung to debris, wooden rafts, cargo nets, floating wreckage. The water temperature was 85 degrees Fahrenheit. The night was dark. Many men were injured, burned, or in shock. The Indianapolis had just completed a secret mission. 10 days earlier, the cruiser had delivered components for the atomic bomb that would be dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th. The mission was classified. The Navy had ordered the Indianapolis to sail unescorted from Tinian to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. The ship traveled alone, without destroyer escort, through waters known to contain Japanese submarines. When the Indianapolis failed to arrive at Leyte Gulf on July 31st, no one noticed. The Navy did not track the ship's position or expect its arrival. The survivors floated in the open ocean for nearly 5 days before being discovered by accident. During those 5 days, they faced dehydration, hypothermia, saltwater poisoning, exposure, and sharks. The sharks, primarily oceanic white-tip sharks drawn by the noise, blood, and vibrations from the sinking, attacked continuously. By the time rescue arrived on August 2nd, only 316 men remained alive. This was the worst naval disaster in U.S. history and the worst shark attack on humans ever recorded. The Indianapolis was hit at 12:14 a.m. while most of the crew slept. The first torpedo struck the bow on the starboard side. The explosion destroyed the forward fuel tanks and ignited aviation fuel stored below deck. Flames shot up from the bow, illuminating the night. The impact threw men from their bunks. Alarms sounded, but the ship's electrical system was damaged, and many alarm systems failed. The second torpedo hit seconds later, striking near the forward magazines where shells and powder were stored. The explosion was catastrophic. The bow section was blown apart. The blast killed hundreds of men instantly, those sleeping in forward compartments, those working in engine rooms, those who happened to be in the wrong place. The ship's structure was compromised. The bow began flooding immediately. Captain Charles McVeigh was on the bridge when the torpedoes hit. He ordered distress signals sent, but the radio room was destroyed. Emergency power failed. The ship listed heavily to starboard, making movement difficult. McVeigh gave the order to abandon ship, but there was no ship-wide announcement system. Officers and sailors passed the order verbally, shouting through passageways and over the noise of fire and rushing water. Men scrambled to reach the deck. Some climbed ladders from below. Others crawled through tilting corridors as the ship rolled. Watertight doors had been closed automatically, trapping men in compartments that were flooding. They pounded on the doors, screaming for help, but no one could open them from the outside. The men trapped below drowned as seawater filled their compartments. On deck, sailors launched life rafts and threw cargo nets overboard. There were not enough rafts for the crew. Many rafts were damaged or inaccessible. Men grabbed life jackets, canvas vests with cork or kapok flotation material, and jumped into the ocean. Some slid down ropes. Others leaped from the tilting deck as the ship rolled further. The jump was 30 to 40 feet into dark water. 12 minutes after the first torpedo hit, the Indianapolis sank. The bow went under first, pulling the rest of the ship down at a steep angle. Men still on deck were thrown into the water or dragged under by the suction of the sinking ship. The stern rose vertically, propellers spinning in the air, and then slipped beneath the surface. The ship was gone. Around 900 men were in the water, scattered across several miles of ocean. The men in the water could not see each other. The night was moonless. The only light came from burning oil floating on the surface, fuel leaking from the wreckage. The fires spread across the water, forcing men to swim away from the flames or risk being burned. Some men swam through the burning oil, their skin blistering, hair singed. Others stayed at the edges, using the light to locate other survivors. Most men wore life jackets, but not all. The jackets were designed to keep the wearer's head above water, but they were uncomfortable and restrictive. The cork or kapok material chafed against skin. Salt water soaked into the fabric, adding weight. Men who had jumped without jackets grabbed floating debris, wooden planks, ammunition crates, chunks of the ship. Some clung to cargo nets or pieces of deck grating. The survivors called out to each other, trying to stay together. "Over here! Swim this way!" Voices echoed across the dark water. Small groups formed, men swimming toward each other, clustering around rafts or debris. Leadership emerged organically. Officers and senior enlisted men took charge of groups, organizing survivors, counting heads, assessing injuries. There were approximately 12 life rafts afloat, each designed to hold 25 men. In practice, the rafts were overloaded. 30, 40, even 50 men crowded onto rafts or hung onto the sides. The rafts had limited supplies: small water kegs, emergency rations, fishing kits, flares. Some rafts had medical kits, others had nothing. The supplies would not last long. Injured men were the priority. The explosions and sinking had caused burns, lacerations, broken bones, and internal injuries. Men with severe burns screamed in pain as salt water touched exposed flesh. Others were unconscious, kept afloat by comrades. There was no morphine, no bandages, no way to treat serious injuries. Men with internal injuries died during the night. Their bodies were pushed away from the rafts to prevent them from weighing down the survivors. The first night was chaos. Men did not know if rescue was coming. They did not know if anyone knew the ship had sunk. They hoped that the Navy would notice the Indianapolis had not arrived at Leyte Gulf and send search planes. They did not know that no one was looking for them. The Navy had not tracked the ship's route. There was no expected arrival time. No distress signal had been received. The men floating in the Pacific Ocean were invisible to the Navy. Dawn revealed the survivors' situation. Scattered across miles of ocean were clusters of men, some in rafts, most clinging to debris or floating in life jackets. The groups were separated by hundreds of yards or more. Currents and wind had pushed them apart during the night. There was no unified group, no single leader. Each cluster was isolated. The sun rose, and with it came heat. The tropical sun was merciless. Men floated in 85-degree water under a blazing sky. There was no shade. The life jackets provided buoyancy, but no protection from the sun. Men's faces, necks, and arms were exposed. Sunburn set in within hours, skin reddened, blistered, and peeled. Some men had lost their hats during the sinking. Their scalps burned. Eyes stung from the glare off the water. Thirst was immediate and overwhelming. Salt water surrounded them, but drinking it was fatal. Seawater contains 3 times the salt concentration of human blood. Drinking it causes dehydration, kidney failure, and death. But the temptation was immense. Men's throats were parched, lips cracked, tongues swelled. Some men drank seawater despite warnings from officers. They vomited, became delirious, and died. The rafts had small water kegs, maybe 2 or 3 gallons per raft. Officers rationed the water strictly. Each man received a capful per day, a few ounces. It was not enough to prevent dehydration, but enough to keep men alive for a few days. Men in life jackets without rafts had no water at all. They begged those on rafts to share. Some shared, others refused, knowing supplies were limited. By midday, the first sharks appeared. Oceanic white-tip sharks, drawn by the noise and vibrations of the sinking, the blood from injured men, and the thrashing of hundreds of bodies in the water. Whitetips are aggressive, opportunistic predators. They circle prey, testing for weakness, then attack. The sharks appeared as dark shapes below the surface, fins cutting through the water. The first attacks were on the dead. Men who had died during the night from injuries floated in life jackets. The sharks fed on the corpses. Survivors watched in horror as sharks tore at the bodies. Blood spread through the water. The feeding frenzy attracted more sharks. Soon there were dozens circling the groups. Then the sharks began attacking the living. Men floating alone, separated from groups, were targeted first. The shark would approach from below, invisible in the dark water, and strike. The victim felt a sudden impact, a blow to the legs or torso, and then pain. The shark bit and pulled the man under. Screams echoed across the water. Other survivors watched helplessly as men disappeared beneath the surface, pulled down by sharks. Sometimes the victim resurfaced, gasping, bleeding, and then was pulled under again. Most did not resurface. By the second day, dehydration and exposure had severe effects. Men who had not drunk water in 36 hours were delirious. The combination of heat, thirst, and psychological stress caused hallucinations. Men saw land, islands, ships, buildings, where there was nothing. They saw rescue planes overhead that did not exist. They heard voices calling to them from the depths. Some men believed they were still on the ship. They insisted the Indianapolis was below them, just beneath the surface, and they could swim down and get water from the galley. Officers tried to restrain them, but some men removed their life jackets and dove, swimming down toward the imagined ship. They drowned. Others believed there was fresh water at the bottom of the ocean. They argued with comrades, insisting they knew where the water was, and then dove and never returned. Violence emerged. Dehydration and delirium made some men aggressive. They attacked each other over imagined slights or hallucinated threats. Men who had been friends fought over life jackets, rafts, or floating debris. Officers struggled to maintain order, but their authority was weakening as they too succumbed to thirst and exhaustion. The sharks continued attacking. By the second day, the sharks had become bolder, attacking men in groups rather than isolating individuals. The sharks learned that the men could not fight back effectively. Men kicked at sharks, hit them with fists or debris, but the attacks were ineffective. The sharks circled, struck, and retreated. Each attack removed another man from the group. Men developed strategies to survive the sharks. They stayed close together, forming tight circles so that no one was isolated. They kicked their legs constantly to create noise and splashing, which sometimes deterred sharks. When a shark approached, men shouted and splashed, trying to scare it away. Sometimes it worked. Often it did not. The psychological toll was immense. Men knew they were being hunted. Every movement in the water, a fish, a piece of debris, a shadow, could be a shark. The constant vigilance was exhausting. Men could not sleep without risking attack. Those who dozed off in their life jackets woke to find sharks circling or comrades missing. Despair set in. Some men gave up. They removed their life jackets and let themselves sink. Others swam away from the groups, seeking solitude or believing they could find land. They did not return. Suicide and abandonment thinned the groups as much as shark attacks. Officers tried to maintain morale, reminding men that rescue would come, but they had no evidence rescue was coming. They were lying to keep men alive. The third day was the worst. By now, nearly 72 hours had passed since the sinking. The men had been without adequate water, food, or sleep. Dehydration had reached critical levels. Men's kidneys were failing. Urine was dark and scant. Some men could not urinate at all. Skin was shriveled. Lips were cracked and bleeding. Eyes were sunken. Men looked skeletal. The sharks attacked in greater numbers. Survivors estimated dozens of sharks circling the groups at any given time. The attacks were constant. Men described the sharks as relentless, fearless, and methodical. The sharks did not flee when confronted. They circled, waited, and struck again. The attacks followed patterns. Sharks targeted men at the edges of groups, those floating slightly apart, those who were injured or weak, those who had stopped moving. The shark approached from below, rising fast, and struck with its jaws. The bite was designed to immobilize prey. The shark's teeth, serrated, triangular, designed for cutting, tore through flesh and bone. The victim was pulled under, thrashing, screaming. Blood spread through the water. Other sharks were drawn by the blood. Multiple sharks converged on a single victim, tearing the body apart. Survivors in rafts or nearby watched, unable to help. Some men tried to pull victims back into rafts, but the sharks were stronger. The victim was gone in seconds, pulled deep, consumed. Men who survived attacks bore horrific injuries. Shark bites removed chunks of flesh from legs, arms, torsos. Bones were exposed. Blood loss was severe. Without medical treatment, infections set in rapidly. Men with shark bites developed gangrene. The smell of rotting flesh attracted more sharks. Some injured men begged to be killed rather than left to suffer. Others were pushed away from the groups because their wounds attracted sharks. They died alone, floating away, attacked repeatedly until they sank. The psychological impact of watching men being eaten alive was unbearable. Survivors described feeling numb, disconnected from reality. The horror was so extreme that the mind could not process it. Men stopped reacting emotionally to deaths. They became mechanical, focused only on survival. Stay in the group, keep kicking, do not stop moving. Empathy and grief were luxuries they could not afford. By the end of the third day, the number of survivors had dropped significantly. Of the approximately 900 men who entered the water, perhaps 500 remained alive. Shark attacks, drowning, suicide, and dehydration had killed the rest. The bodies floated in life jackets or sank into the depths. The survivors no longer counted the dead. They focused on staying alive for one more hour, one more day. On the fourth day, the survivors still had not been found. The Navy had not noticed the Indianapolis was missing. The ship's failure to arrive at Leyte Gulf on July 31st had not triggered concern. The routing orders were classified, and communication between commands was poor. No one was looking for the ship or its crew. This was not an accident. The Navy's procedures were flawed. Ships traveling alone were not tracked closely. There was an assumption that if a ship did not arrive, it would send a distress signal. The Indianapolis had sent no signal. Its radio was destroyed in the first seconds of the attack. The Navy assumed the ship was delayed or had diverted for some reason. No search was initiated. Meanwhile, the survivors continued to die. Dehydration had advanced to the point where men's organs were shutting down. Kidneys failed, hearts stopped. Men died quietly, slipping into unconsciousness and then death. Their bodies were pushed away from the rafts. The sharks fed on them. Some men drank seawater despite knowing it would kill them. The thirst was unbearable. They could not resist. They drank, vomited, became delirious, and died. Others drank their own urine, which was less harmful than seawater but still accelerated dehydration and kidney damage. A few men caught rainwater during brief showers, but the amount was negligible. Hallucinations worsened. Men saw ships on the horizon that were not there. They shouted for rescue, waved their arms, and wept when the imaginary ships did not stop. Some men insisted that a hotel or a submarine was nearby, offering fresh water and food. They tried to swim to it and drowned. Officers could no longer control the delusional men. There were too many, and the officers themselves were weakening. The sharks remained. By the fourth day, the sharks had consumed dozens of men. The pattern was familiar: circling, testing, striking, feeding. The survivors had no defense. They could only wait and hope the sharks would attack someone else. Guilt was common. Men felt relief when a shark took someone else, and then felt guilt for feeling relieved. The moral and psychological burden of survival was crushing. Some men prayed, others cursed. A few sang hymns or recited poetry, trying to maintain sanity. Many simply floated in silence, conserving energy, waiting for death or rescue, whichever came first. On August 2nd, at approximately 11 a.m., a U.S. Navy Lockheed PV-1 Ventura patrol bomber, piloted by Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, was flying a routine anti-submarine patrol. Gwynn was not looking for survivors. He was testing a malfunctioning antenna. While flying at low altitude, Gwynn noticed an oil slick on the ocean surface. He descended to investigate and saw men in the water. Gwynn immediately radioed the sighting. "Many men in water!" He dropped a life raft and supplies and circled the area. Other aircraft were diverted to the location. A PBY Catalina seaplane, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Robert Adrian Marks, arrived first. Marks was ordered to mark the location but not to land. Seaplanes were not supposed to land in open ocean because the waves could damage the aircraft. Marks ignored the order. He saw men being attacked by sharks and men drowning. He landed the PBY on the ocean, damaging the hull in the process, and began pulling survivors from the water. The PBY was designed to carry a crew of 8. Marks crammed 56 survivors onto and into the aircraft, packing men into every available space. The aircraft could not take off with the added weight, so Marks taxied on the surface, keeping the survivors afloat until rescue ships arrived. Destroyers and destroyer escorts rushed to the scene. The USS Doyle arrived first, followed by other ships. Sailors threw cargo nets and ropes over the side. Survivors, many too weak to climb, were hauled aboard in nets or carried up on stretchers. Some men were unconscious. Others were delirious, screaming about sharks or hallucinations. Medical personnel triaged the survivors, treating the most seriously injured first, comforting the dying. Rescue operations continued through the night. Ships searched the area with spotlights, pulling men from the water. By the morning of August 3rd, the search was called off. A total of 316 men were rescued. The rest, approximately 880 men, were dead. The survivors were taken to field hospitals on Peleliu and Guam. Many were in critical condition. Severe dehydration, exposure, shark bites, and infections required immediate treatment. Some men died in the hospital despite medical care. The official count of survivors was eventually recorded as 316, though some sources list 317 due to discrepancies in records. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis was the worst naval disaster in U.S. history. Of the 1,196 men aboard when the ship sank, only 316 survived. Approximately 300 died in the initial sinking or the explosions. The remaining 880 died over 5 days in the water from drowning, dehydration, exposure, and shark attacks. The shark attacks were the worst in recorded history. Oceanic white-tip sharks, drawn by the noise and blood from the sinking, attacked survivors continuously for 5 days. Estimates vary, but survivors reported dozens of men killed by sharks, with some estimates as high as 150. The exact number is unknown because many deaths were attributed to multiple causes. Men weakened by dehydration were more vulnerable to sharks, and shark-bitten men died from blood loss or infection. The Navy's failure to notice the Indianapolis was missing resulted in a court-martial. Captain Charles McVeigh, the ship's commander, was court-martialed for hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag and for failing to order abandoned ship in a timely manner. The charges were controversial. Zigzagging was not required in conditions of poor visibility, and McVeigh had ordered abandoned ship as soon as the damage was assessed. Many survivors and historians believe McVeigh was scapegoated to deflect blame from systemic Navy failures, poor routing procedures, lack of tracking, and failure to notice the ship was missing. McVeigh was convicted of failing to zigzag, but was restored to active duty. The conviction ruined his reputation. He received hate mail from families of dead sailors. In 1968, McVeigh committed suicide. In 2000, Congress passed a resolution exonerating him, acknowledging that the court-martial was unjust. The survivors carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Shark bite survivors bore disfiguring injuries. Many suffered from post-traumatic stress, nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance. Some could not swim or go near water. Others drank to cope with memories. The experience of floating for 5 days, watching men die, being hunted by sharks, and being forgotten by the Navy left psychological wounds that never fully healed. The Indianapolis survivors formed an association and held annual reunions. They shared their stories, honored the dead, and supported each other. The story of the Indianapolis remained relatively unknown for decades. In 1975, the book and later the film Jaws included a monologue by the character Quint describing his experience as an Indianapolis survivor, bringing the story to wider public attention. In 2017, the wreck of the USS Indianapolis was located on the floor of the Pacific Ocean at a depth of 18,000 feet by a civilian research expedition led by Paul Allen. The discovery provided closure for some survivors and families. The wreck is a war grave, protected by law, and remains undisturbed. The story of the USS Indianapolis is a reminder of the costs of war, the failures of institutions, and the limits of human endurance. The men who survived 5 days in the water, hunted by sharks, forgotten by their own Navy, demonstrated extraordinary resilience and will to live. Their experience is one of the most harrowing survival stories in military history.